Clair Obscur has been among my most anticipated games since its reveal at last year's Xbox showcase. I was immediately intrigued by Expedition 33's stunning art direction, the stylish presentation of its turn-based combat, and its wildly creative story pitch. I just had that gut feeling from the jump that Clair Obscur was going to be something special. However, with Expedition 33 coming from a brand new studio, Sandfall Interactive, I also had my expectations in check, as there's no prior track record for the studio to use as a baseline for our expectations. So I was fully expecting Clair Obscur to have its rough edges, and I knew there was a chance that Expedition 33 could be a game that showed well in a pre-release setting, only to underdeliver and disappoint in its final form, as it's rare for a team to completely knock it out of the park on their first project. But I'm thrilled to say that Clair Obscur Expedition 33 panned out beautifully, exceeding my expectations in every conceivable way, masterfully paying tribute to the JRPGs of old, while implementing enough modern conveniences to make this an approachable experience for those who don't normally gel with this style of gameplay. It's almost impossible to believe that this is Sandfall's first project, as this motley crew of developers assembled from ex-Ubisoft employees, talent found on Reddit, and a composer discovered through SoundCloud, has defied all expectations to deliver the best original RPG of the past decade. With its immaculately written and performed characters, masterfully designed combat system, and sorrow-filled story that has not left my mind since finishing the game, Clair Obscur is perhaps the strongest studio debut ever, and a clear frontrunner for Game of the Year 2025. Before I dive into this review, I want to point out that while I will, as always, avoid any major story spoilers, and will primarily show footage I've captured in the early hours of Clair Obscur, I'm going to name, discuss, and show the various party members you recruit throughout Clair Obscur, as well as their unique abilities. So if you're extremely sensitive to spoilers, to the point that you consider even gameplay mechanics to be spoilers, then you might want to bounce out of this video until you've played a bit of Clair Obscur for yourself. And I'll say now, if you're interested in Clair Obscur, just buy it. I doubt you'll regret it. But for those who want to learn a little more about Clair Obscur and need that extra push before diving in, or if you've played or are playing Expedition 33 and just want to hear another player's perspective, that's what I'm here for. With that warning out of the way, let's dive right into the review. One of the first things that sold me on Clair Obscur was its wonderfully creative story premise and entrancing, melancholic vibe. If you haven't heard the basic pitch, Clair Obscur centres around a crew of characters from a city called Lumiere, which is inhabited by the last remnants of humanity. About 67 years ago, a being known only as the Paintress appeared on the horizon and started painting a number in the sky on the same day every year. When she paints this number, it starts what the inhabitants of Lumiere call the gommage, where everyone of and above the age of the number she writes dies, turning to dust as if they were snapped away by Thanos. The Paintress started at 100, but every year the number counts down by 1, constantly decreasing the age of the remaining population. This year, she painted the number 33, meaning that there is nobody left in the world over the age of 32, completely recontextualising the timeline of life and people's perspective on age. This is a world where people have kids young, so they have as much time to raise them before their gommage, and many people alive now have never even seen a person with grey hair. Every year, an expedition is sent out to try and kill the paintress and break the cycle of death once and for all, though up until this point, all prior expeditions have of course been unsuccessful. That's where our main crew of characters, the members of Expedition 33, come in, with most of our expedition party being composed of people in their early 30s, setting out on this seemingly suicidal mission as they're destined to gamage in the coming year anyway, and may as well use the last of their time to try and stop the paintress. This is one of the most outlandish and original concepts for a story I've heard in quite some time, and Sandfall has fully capitalised on this brilliant premise, delivering an incredibly well-written, mature story. I think sometimes writers mistake edgy for mature, but Sandfall has avoided this trap, with the writers masterfully weaving a truly deep adult story, which I know could sound a bit pretentious, but it's true. Clair Obscur has one of those stories that gets its hooks deep in you from the very first cutscene. I couldn't stop thinking about this game, theorising about what was really happening in this world, and where the story would take me next whenever I wasn't playing. Throughout its 3 chapters, there were many moments where Expedition 33 had me quite literally screaming, "Holy shit, are we really doing this right now?" at the TV. This is a brilliant, shocking, and captivating story that becomes more and more of a mindfuck as it goes on. As you'd expect from a game centred on a population who have been surrounded by death their entire lives, witnessing younger and younger people losing their lives every year, Expedition 33 is a dark and sombre experience that deals heavily in themes of loss and grief. But it's not so consistently depressing that it's a miserable experience. Sandfall threads the needle perfectly, offering an experience that has a pervasive sadness to it without feeling too oppressive. They also never overstep the line into feeling melodramatic or cheaply emotionally manipulative. And it's not all sadness and sorrow, as Expedition 33's sharp writing can also be very funny when it's required to be. There's a lot of comic relief provided by supporting characters, like the paintbrush-headed Gestrels, who speak a butchered version of French, and our big doofy companion Esquier, who helps Expedition 33 traverse treacherous terrain by serving as their vehicle. Esquier has massive Studio Ghibli vibes, both in his design and the way he's written. A small touch that helps make cutscenes even more engaging in Expedition 33 is the way Sandfall has experimented with the camera in cutscenes in a way I've seen very few games attempt. Take their use of letterboxing for instance. Certain cutscenes have horizontal letterboxing to add to the cinematic feel of Clair Obscur. This is nothing new. Plenty of games do this, and they have for a long time. I always think of The Evil Within, and the way Tango used letterboxing in gameplay as well to make you feel like you're playing an interactive horror movie. But Clair Obscur also utilises vertical letterboxing to put some cutscenes in a 4:3 aspect ratio, like you're watching an old TV show, which I don't think I've ever seen done in a game before. When you think of your favourite RPG, one of the first things to come to mind is likely its cast of characters. This is certainly true for me when I think of my favourite RPG, Persona 4. This is because a compelling cast is the lifeblood of any great RPG, and that's certainly something Sandfall provides in Expedition 33. Clair Obscur has an incredible cast of characters, and Sandfall has recruited an extraordinary roster of talent to bring them to life. Our core crew at the start of Clair Obscur, who composed this year's expedition team, are Gustav, our de facto leader, who you might know as the character who looks a little like a bootleg Robert Pattinson. The determined and inquisitive mage, Lune, who's constantly trying to unravel the mysteries of the world. Kind-hearted warrior CL, who's the emotional rock of the group, always there to support her crew despite bearing the weight of the crushing tragedies of her own past. and Mayel, who at the age of just 16 is the youngest member of the expedition by a mile. Mayel was taken in by Gustav and his sister Emma after losing her parents when she was just 3. And unlike the other members of Expedition 33, who are in their 30s and destined to go Mage soon anyway, Mayel would have another 9 years before her age intersects with the go Mage number. So the others are hesitant about her participation in the expedition. But Mayel is determined to join the expedition, as being an orphan, Gustav has become a surrogate brother to her. And if he's leaving on the expedition, she feels that there's nothing for her to stay in Lumiere for. And she quickly proves to be a vital member of the crew due to her combat prowess. I was invested in the crew of Expedition 33 from the jump, thanks in no small part to the extraordinary performances provided by Clair Obscur's talented and surprisingly big name cast. Gustav is played by none other than Daredevil himself, Charlie Cox, while Mayel is played by Jennifer English, who's best known for her role as Shadowheart in Baldur's Gate 3. In many ways, Mayel is the heart of Expedition 33, and Jennifer's scene-stealing performance brings so much to this character. I will be astounded if this performance doesn't net her another nomination for Performance of the Year at this year's Game Awards. But these are far from the only notable names in Expedition 33's cast list. We also have someone who has quickly become one of my favourite voice actors, Final Fantasy XVI's Ben Starr, playing Verso, another party member the crew meets along their journey, and the legendary Andy Serkis, playing a character named Renoir. I can't talk too much about Verso and Renoir, as they're not fully introduced until the second chapter of Expedition 33, and I wouldn't want to spoil anything. But I will say, both of these actors give unbelievable performances. Andy Serkis has played countless iconic characters over the years, be it Caesar in Planet of the Apes, Gollum in The Lord of the Rings, Ulysses Klaue in the MCU, or Alfred Pennyworth in The Batman. So I don't say this lightly, but I think Renoir is my favourite performance he's ever given, with his imposing presence adding so much weight to this mysterious character. Even the actors I wasn't familiar with going into Expedition 33, like Kirsty Ryder, who plays Lune, and Charla Nix, who plays CL, absolutely crush their roles here, never letting themselves get overshadowed by the superstars they're acting opposite. This incredible ensemble solidifies the character lineup of Expedition 33 as one of the greatest RPG rosters of all time. Expedition 33 offers plenty of opportunities to learn more about each of your party members by spending time with them at camp when the crew is resting up. These optional scenes help to flesh out each character's history and motivations, and they do a great job of getting you more and more attached to the cast as the story progresses. After each major story beat, you'll want to set up camp and take the time to talk with everyone in your crew to get their perspective on the events that have just unfolded. Without spoiling anything, these social mechanics get a little more in depth from Chapter 2 onwards, though they do remain quite simplistic and light throughout. This certainly isn't Persona by any means. You're never forced to make choices about how you allocate your time. You just bond with all of these characters in one big batch by talking to each party member one after the next whenever you hit a major event in the plot. So while the scenes themselves are incredibly well written, the social mechanics they're attached to do feel a tad underbaked. Excellent writing and characters are a key part of making a great RPG, but what makes Expedition 33 truly stand out as an all-time RPG great is its sublime combat system that masterfully blends turn-based combat with real-time mechanics. I know what you're likely thinking, this isn't a new concept. It's something RPGs have toyed with for decades, all the way back to Super Mario RPG on the SNES, and just a couple of years ago we got another excellent example of this style of combat with Sea of Stars. But Clair Obscur offers a far deeper, more nuanced battle system than any game that has attempted these mechanics before. While most turn-based RPGs that implement real-time button presses use them to give you little attack and defense bonuses, in Clair Obscur, nailing the timing on these prompts is essential to survive. Clair Obscur's enemies hit hard, and if you don't get the timing down for parrying attacks, your team is going to be wiped in just a couple of turns, especially as you get deeper into the game, as there's a pretty significant difficulty spike in the final third of Expedition 33, when enemies' attack combos become more intricate and difficult to parry. Because of this, Clair Obscur is more skill-based than most RPGs, as you can't just level grind until you're overpowered enough to kill any enemy, because no matter how powerful you are, you'll still encounter enemies that can obliterate a party member's health bar in 2 hits. When you first encounter a new enemy type, battles against them can be very challenging, as you don't know their attack patterns yet, and are having to try and time parries by carefully watching their every movement, which is made all the more difficult as enemies will often mess with you by feinting and performing little jukes to cause you to parry or dodge too early before hitting you with a real attack a split second later than you expect. But once you crack an enemy's attack pattern and get in a rhythmic flow of parrying every attack they send your way, you feel like a god. But be careful, because even once you've killed an enemy, you're not necessarily out of the woods yet, because some giant enemies, once slain, will stumble towards your party before collapsing, and you'll have to dodge out of the way before you're crushed by their tumbling corpse. I don't think I've ever seen a game do this before, and I was completely caught off guard the first time it happened, and had my soul-standing party member obliterated when I thought the battle was already won. The stakes get even higher once gradient counters are introduced. These allow you to parry extremely powerful attacks that your normal parry can't deflect. But it's high risk, high reward, because if you miss the timing of these parries, any party members hit are almost certainly getting downed. Thankfully, Expedition 33's combat system also has a way of helping you learn enemies' attack patterns. While you'll want to aim for parries, as if you parry every hit in a string of attacks, you'll hit the enemy with a counter-attack, and for another reason we'll get into in a minute, you can dodge attacks instead, and your dodge has a more generous window than your parry, meaning you won't take damage even if your timing isn't quite perfect. These real-time elements in combat are a great way to keep players who aren't usually interested in turn-based games engaged. However, even without them, I think it'd be hard not to find these fights exciting thanks to Expedition 33's spectacular presentation. There's some clear Persona influence in the stylish transitions and sleek menus that pop up when in battle in Clair Obscur, and Sandfall has put so much care and attention to detail into the little details in fights. From small visual flourishes like the real-time battle damage, with party members getting bloody and dirty as they fight, to the way the characters manifest their weapons from thin air at the start of a battle, right down to the sound design of the satisfying little ping you hear when landing a perfect parry. Even beyond the real-time elements, Expedition 33's combat system is filled with extra mechanics that separate it from the turn-based JRPGs that inspired it, like its ranged combat. At any point in a fight, your party members can whip out a ranged weapon and shoot at their opponent, with each shot taking 1 point of AP, Clair Obscur's version of mana. Countless scenarios require ranged attacks in Expedition 33. Some enemies have shatterable weak points that once destroyed will cause massive damage to them. There's an enemy type that walks around with a giant mine on a chain that once shot will detonate and deal damage to every enemy on screen. Sometimes you'll want to fire off a series of shots to break an enemy's shield to make them vulnerable to the next party member's attack. And there are flying enemies that can only be damaged by ranged attacks. Aside from the stylistic flair of the UI, another similarity between Persona and Clair Obscur is that Clair Obscur's combat system also has a heavy emphasis on elemental damage and status effects, with different attacks burning enemies, dealing break damage to stagger them and prevent them from moving on their next turn, or marking them, with a marked enemy taking 50% more damage from the next attack that hits them. In Clair Obscur, you fight with a party of 3 characters, though once you have more than 3 unlocked, the remaining fighters will become your reserve team and will be sent in if all your party members are downed to hopefully finish the enemy off. Like any JRPG, party composition is an essential part of winning battles in Clair Obscur. All up, you have 6 party members in Expedition 33. Gustave, Maël, CL, Lune, Verso, and the party member I haven't mentioned yet, Monoko, a Gestrel recruited to the side of the expedition, who like most other Gestrels, loves nothing more than a good fight, and is mostly just tagging along because he knows there will be a lot of fighting involved. I toyed around with every possible combination of characters, though I quickly found that I needed Lune as a staple in any party, as she's your primary healer and can even resurrect downed allies without using an item. 6 party members is a smaller selection than most of the JRPGs that inspired Clair Obscur, but Sandfall was smart to focus in on a smaller group, as in doing so, they were able to ensure each of the 6 party members has a distinct skill set that makes them feel completely different from their allies, with each character having their own skill tree that allows you to craft countless builds for them to tailor them to the role in fights you want them to fill. You'll also unlock various outfits and hairstyles to customise the look of your party, though I will say there's a box you can tick in Clair Obscur's options to switch everyone back to their default look during cutscenes, and you should probably tick that box, because I didn't, and I ended up in a very emotional cutscene with all of my party members in stupid swimsuits, which did slightly undercut the moment. Each member of Expedition 33 also has a unique mechanical gimmick. Gustave has his overcharge meter that builds up energy in his prosthetic arm as he fights, which when full can be used to unleash a massive blast of electrical energy, dealing huge damage to his opponent. CL wields magical cards that stack something called Foretell as she fights, which can then be consumed to increase the damage of her attacks. Maël can switch between 3 different stances in combat that augment her attack and defense stats. Lune's attacks generate elemental stains that can be spent to enhance her attacks. Verso has a perfection rating that fluctuates based on his performance in combat, with his grading ranging from D to S. He gains perfection every time he deals damage, and loses some whenever he takes a hit. A high perfection rating increases the damage of many of Verso's skills, and can even add bonus status effects to them. Finally, Monoko is perhaps the most unique party member mechanically. Unlike the rest of the party members, Monoko doesn't unlock his abilities from a skill tree. Instead, if he's in the party when you win a fight, he'll collect the feet of the defeated enemies, which allows him to transform into said enemies and utilise one of their skills. Monoko's unique ability is the Bestial Wheel, which spins whenever he starts a turn. This wheel has all of his different damage types on it, and will boost the power of all abilities of the damage type it lands on for that turn. Sandfall has cited the Final Fantasy games as a major inspiration for Expedition 33, so it's only fitting that they have a luck-based character to give some Cait Sith vibes. Clair Obscur's combat truly starts to shine when you figure out the different ways you can combine your party's abilities. You can break this game wide open once you start figuring out the best ways to use your party's abilities in tandem, creating endless OP combos, with Maël being the key to many of my favourite strategies. For example, Maël has an ability that makes enemies weak to fire damage. If you cast that, then bombard enemies with fire spells with your other party members, you can stack 40 plus burn markers on enemies, at which point you can just sit back and watch their health bar plummet to 0 without having to lift a finger. Or you can use a technique that puts Mayel in her virtuous stance, allowing her to deal 200% damage on her next turn, then mark the enemy with Verso, so the enemy takes 50% extra damage from the next hit. Finally, hit them with one of Mayel's attacks that deals additional damage when she's in virtuous stance, and you'll land the most powerful attack possible at 250% damage, shredding through half of a boss's health bar in one hit. Sandfall has implemented countless little ideas that allow Expedition 33 to simultaneously streamline but also expand upon the classic JRPG formula. I love the way that Clair Obscur handles mana. It's not your traditional RPG mana system. As usual, you use the mana equivalent AP to use skills and fire your ranged weapon, but unlike other RPGs, your AP isn't a finite resource that's constantly draining, only to be refilled by resting or using an item. Instead, you're constantly building up more AP in combat by landing melee attacks and parrying enemy strikes, which is the other reason it's so crucial to get enemies' attack patterns down as quickly as possible, and parry rather than dodge their attacks. If you manage to parry an entire string of attacks from a boss, you'll feel that character's AP enough to perform a skill next turn, even if their AP was completely depleted. Another way Sandfall streamlines JRPG mechanics in Clair Obscur is through the game's unique item system, which is more reminiscent of a Souls game than a turn-based RPG. You'll only ever have 4 item types in Expedition 33, 3 of which, your health potion, elixir that replenishes AP points, and revive potion, can be used mid-battle, while your 4th item, the Chroma Elixir, can only be used outside of combat to restore all party members to full health. Unlike your usual JRPG, these items can't be bought from a shop in Clair Obscur. You have a set number of each, and they only refill when you stop at an expedition flag. Clair Obscur's equivalent to a bonfire, where you can rest up and heal, and spend the attribute points you've earned through battling to upgrade your characters. But through exploring Clair Obscur's environments, you'll find items that upgrade the potency of healing items, as well as the amount of them you can carry. Like Persona 3 Reload and the modern Pokemon games, Clair Obscur implements XP share so that characters who aren't in your party are still earning XP while they're on the back burner, preventing the unnecessary grinding that often sends the pacing of JRPGs grinding to a halt. Sure, I hit points in Clair Obscur that were challenging, and it would frequently take me 2 or 3 attempts to take down a boss as I got to grips with their attack pattern, but they never felt insurmountable like bosses in a classic Dragon Quest game would without level grinding. Another modernisation of the formula you'll find in Clair Obscur is that there are no random battles. Every enemy you'll fight appears on the map for you to choose whether to engage or not, so you're not being bombarded with random battles every 5 steps like you were in the early Final Fantasy games, though I still went out of my way to fight every enemy I spotted on the map, which is probably why I never needed to grind. As you progress through Clair Obscur, you genuinely feel your party members growing and becoming infinitely more powerful than they were at the start of their journey, and this is largely thanks to Clair Obscur's Pictos and Luminas system, which is the most innovative and exciting new idea brought to the table by Sandfall. Pictos are perks that offer a myriad of bonuses to your characters when equipped, ranging from adding an extra hit to your base melee attack, making the character immune to status effects, adding 50% more damage to their first attack of the fight, gaining AP when performing counters or killing enemies, adding burn damage to their bullets, or dealing damage to every enemy on screen if the party member gets downed. The Pictos alone add an extra layer of depth to character customization, but the real kicker is that once a character has a Picto equipped for enough fights, they'll master it, which turns it into a Lumina that can be equipped by any party member. Each Lumina requires a certain amount of Lumina points to equip, which means you can only have a few equipped on each party member to start with. But the party are constantly gaining more Lumina points throughout their adventure, and by the time you're 20 hours into Clair Obscur, each of your party members will be outfitted with scores of Luminas simultaneously, meaning each turn they take will trigger a chain of events where they're getting buff after buff applied to them, making everyone in your party insanely powerful. This is such an ingenious system, and it allows you to tweak every party member to perfection. Another reason the combat is so compelling in Expedition 33 is because of the abundance of enemy types you'll be taking on. From runic enemies, to cloaked beings wearing old diver helmets, to freaky ass mimes. There are few RPGs with as much enemy variety as Clair Obscur, and the creature design for these enemies is extraordinary. Some of these beings are awe-inspiring, others are absolutely horrific, like the hand monsters. Can we just take a minute to ask, how did this become a thing? From Death Stranding to Elden Ring, now Clair Obscur, why did so many developers decide to include grotesque hand creatures in their games? God, they make me uncomfortable. There's also undeniably more than a little FromSoft inspiration in the enemy design in Clair Obscur. Maybe a little too much in one or two cases, like the Dual Least boss. Look at this guy. You're gonna tell me this isn't just Pontiff Sullivane from Dark Souls 3? Structurally, Clair Obscur feels somewhat reminiscent of the JRPGs of the SNES and PS1 eras. When traversing its world, you move across an old-school overworld map, like you'd find in the classic Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest games. Overworlds aren't something we see too often anymore, but they're a crucial part of the classic RPGs that Sandfall drew inspiration from, so I love that they paid homage to those games in this way. It's a real shame overworld maps fell to the wayside in the mainstream AAA scene. More developers should be taking advantage of them. It's far more interesting to explore an overworld map than to select locations to fast travel to from a menu. Overworld maps are also a clever trick for making it feel like your party is on this grand adventure when you can't feasibly build a gigantic open world. Of course, like any good overworld, Clair Obscur's map is filled with secrets, optional islands to explore, collectibles, dangerous super bosses in the vein of Final Fantasy VII's weapon bosses, and mini-games, including a beach volleyball minigame where you're parrying back and forth a baby Gestrel instead of a ball, but it's okay because he said it's fine. It's also such a neat touch that you can control any party member while exploring in Expedition 33, switching between party members in an instant at the press of a button, with no load times whatsoever. It's so cool that this is where we're at with technology like SSDs, that games can just switch character models in and out in the blink of an eye with no loading or going into a menu to swap them out. Unfortunately, the optional content also houses the only part of Expedition 33 that I truly dislike. Its weird, janky platforming sections. Occasionally, one of the optional areas in Clair Obscur will require you to complete a platforming challenge, and woof are they rough. Clair Obscur's traversal wasn't built for platforming. It's a turn-based RPG, so why would it be? Yet these platforming segments require a degree of precision that's frankly not compatible with the game's loose movement. You need to land perfectly on narrow walkways, but if there's any drop whatsoever, the character will roll when they hit the ground, making platforming all the more cumbersome, as more often than not, the character will roll off the edge and plummet to their death after a jump. So you need to account for their roll before you jump and line yourself up at just the right angle to roll forward on the platform and not off the sides. This had me pulling my hair out. Thankfully, there aren't too many of these platforming segments, but that just raises the question of why Sandfall chose to include them in the first place. They're hardly an integral part of the game, so they would have been better left on the cutting room floor. Fortunately, there is also a lot to love about Clair Obscur's optional content, like the way Sandfall expertly uses Expedition 33's collectibles for additional world building. So many games have such nothing collectibles that are only there as a box for you to tick off for a trophy, but Sandfall has included collectibles of real consequence that expand the lore of this world. Along your trek towards the Paintress, the collectibles you'll find are journals left behind by prior expeditions. These journals are fully voiced, and they not only teach you about the prior expeditions, but are also filled with all the knowledge they accumulated along their journey, that they've left behind to try and help their successors get a little further than they managed to. Expedition 33, of course, also continues this tradition, with Lune constantly recording notes that could be passed on to the theoretical Expedition 32 if they don't succeed. And Gustav keeps a journal documenting all of their adventures to give to his apprentices back home if they do succeed in stopping the Paintress. You're given the option to explore Clair Obscur's world as much or as little as you want. If you prefer to just go from point A to point B and focus only on the story, you're free to do so. And despite offering an explorable overworld map, Expedition 33 is a fairly linear game, with the environments you explore being mostly straightforward corridors. Expedition 33 actually reminded me a lot of Final Fantasy X and 13 in this sense, which may sound off-putting to some, but it wasn't a turn-off to me at all. After all, a lot of my favourite gaming experiences are entirely linear. If a game is well designed, there's nothing inherently wrong with linearity. I also want to give props to Expedition 33 for being the rare RPG that respects your time. You're probably looking at 25 to 30 hours to finish the story, though you'll easily double that if you want to see and do everything. While Expedition 33 is perhaps the most impressive studio debut I've ever seen, it does have a couple of nagging issues and omissions that cue you in on the fact that Sandfall isn't the most experienced studio in the world. Clair Obscur has no local area maps, which in turn makes it easy to get turned around in certain environments. It also means when you encounter an enemy you're not high enough level to fight yet, you'll have to memorise where they are and how to get back to them, because there's no map to screenshot or place a pin on. It feels like Expedition 33 is actively trying to prevent you from completing all of its optional content, because there's also no quest log to check what missions are active and what missions you've completed, and there's no indicators on the map to show what parts of the world you've explored. I'm not asking for the game to hold my hand and guide me everywhere, but I would appreciate a little tick on the map to show that I've killed the optional boss in an area, so that I don't waste my time doubling back to places that I don't need to. One last pet peeve is that Clair Obscur doesn't let you manually save. It's all auto-save, and you only have a single save slot, meaning that if you want to start a New Game Plus run, you have to erase your endgame save. I'd much prefer to create a new save file so I can start playing through the story again, while leaving the door open to go back and clean up the side content I haven't finished without redoing all that work over again. Clair Obscur's world offers a massive degree of environmental variety, taking you through all of the RPG's staple environments and beyond. From forests to snowy mountain ranges to a jaw-dropping underwater biome, Expedition 33 is full of gorgeous environments. In fact, I would go as far as to say Clair Obscur has some of the most spectacular and creative environment design I've ever seen in a game. And the environments just keep getting more in-depth and impressive the deeper into Clair Obscur you get. This game just has such a strong visual identity all around. There's a strange dreamlike feeling to the intentional haziness of Clair Obscur's visuals, and the character and creature design is impeccable. But what stood out to me the most about the look of Clair Obscur is Sandfall's spectacular use of colour, with the game alternating between bright, vibrant colours to washed out, desaturated colours to match the desolate nature of the story. There's even straight up chromatic sequences, completely devoid of colour, that have a truly eerie energy to them. Is Clair Obscur the prettiest game on a technical level? No, it's objectively not. Clair Obscur has a distinctly AA look. This isn't a game where you're going to be blown away by realistic textures and lifelike hair physics, because Sandfall has smartly allocated their budget elsewhere. But Clair Obscur is a prime example of how great art direction will always be more important than sheer technical fidelity. Clair Obscur's stunning world is complemented by an equally impressive musical suite. This score is nothing short of incredible, and it offers a crazy degree of variety and genre-bending experimentation. There are somber piano ballads that add to the desperation of this quest, bizarre electronic tracks with weird distorted vocals layered over them, upbeat pop and jazz-inspired music, and haunting opera songs. How many game soundtracks just freely jump from pianos to synths to brass instruments? It's truly wild how many sound profiles the composers dabble with here. But this certainly isn't a jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none situation. No matter what genre the composers dip into, it all sounds incredible. And let me tell you, when the music pops off during the final boss fight of Expedition 33, chills all over. This is a soundtrack that truly heightens every emotion of the game, both positive and negative. I don't think it's recency bias when I say this might be one of the best video game soundtracks of all time. JRPGs are one of my favourite genres of games, and with Clair Obscur Expedition 33, a French studio has somehow managed to deliver one of the best examples of this style of gameplay I've ever seen. Clair Obscur offers a beautiful refinement and revolution of the classic JRPG formula, with its mechanics and world design simultaneously paying tribute to many of the best aspects of the genre, while also modernising them to widen the appeal to new players. Sandfall has crafted one of the best turn-based combat systems I've ever had the pleasure of playing, while also telling an emotional and layered story full of characters that are going to stick with me for years to come. This is what we need more of in this industry. Fresh new ideas executed well. Sandfall has made something truly special with Clair Obscur, and staked their place as one of the most exciting new studios in the gaming industry. Expedition 33 is one of the finest RPGs of this decade, and easily the best game I've played in 2025 thus far. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, or leave a comment. You can find countless other videos on my channel, including my recent review of South of Midnight, and be sure to stay tuned for my upcoming reviews of Doom the Dark Ages and Mario Kart World. Till next time, be well guys.